Okay, so as you saw in that video, there is, man, again, there's weird videos on YouTube these days. I don't know if this guy was just somebody who's just sitting in his basement, knows how to use YouTube. I have no idea. Anyways, but he does make some good points that I kind of want to focus on here. So this would be the Rust Belt here. The Rust Belt is this area, and again, what it said in that video and what I will sort of confirm is these are the areas that sort of were doing super well in the late 1800s, early 1900s, particularly because they were all about steel production. Steel production and the things you make with it. So when we think of Detroit, like we think of cars. So the steel's being made in this area. It's going to Detroit. They're making cars out of it, and then they're shipping it all over the world. Steel. Sometimes it's called the Steel Belt. Now, the reason we call it the Rust Belt is because the steel industry has kind of collapsed. It's rusted, I guess you could say. And that's included the coal areas because coal was a big way of making the steel. You needed the coal to make the steel. No steel, you don't need the coal as much anymore. So they call it the Rust Belt. And population in this area is at least sort of, I guess you could say, stagnated, if not declined. But what we've seen over that sort of same era for the last sort of 60 years, we've seen people moving into this area called the Sun Belt. This sort of, again, Sun Belt because it's just a nice area. For lack of a better thing, right? You can think of all the reasons that might go into this. You saw some in that video, but you can just think of some off the top of your head. Do I want to live in Michigan where it snows all the time, or would I rather live in a place where it's warm all the time? Okay, that's great. Especially now that we have AC. I know I'm harping on this, but AC is a big deal in this. Once we have AC, a lot of these areas that were unlivable are now livable. So why not move down to those areas? Another thing we have in these areas is you have, and we're going to talk about that here in a second, but you have more job opportunities. So let's talk about that for a second. Second half of the 20th century is this Rust Belt to Sun Belt. So the 1960s, the Northeast and the Midwest, they suffer these economic problems. And one of the big reasons why is, I'm going to say China for now, but really it's Asia all over the place. That with globalization, okay, so I have to build my factory. Let's say it's 1960 and I got to build my factory. Do I want to build my factory in this area, this Northeast and the Midwest, where the people there have already unionized and the wages are high? Or do I build my factory over here in China and where the population, the wages are really, really low, the population is skilled enough to sort of do this, and it's super cheap now because of globalization, super cheap to move goods from China to the United States. All of a sudden, I'm making way more money. Why would I build my factory here when I could build it in China? And that's essentially what happens is factories just move other places. It's cheaper to do stuff in other places than here. So you have higher labor costs, the international competition, especially with respect to Asia, and you have outdated technology and infrastructure. So back when these factories in the Northeast and Midwest were first built, they had the height of technology, this new thing called electricity and roads and things like that. If you're gonna do this thing here in the 1960s, the infrastructure is old, the technology is old. Like you have to sort of start over. If I'm going to start over, I might as well build my factory in China, and that's kind of the thing that happens. Another thing that's happening at the same time is as a result of World War II and then the shift to Cold War, the military is developing new areas in the Southwest. It's not a big coincidence. There's a lot of military bases in the Southwest. And they're doing this for training and base, and there's just a lot of space in the Southwest. I can have a pretty large area, Area 52 over there in, New Mexico, or I can have some of the, Edwards Air Force Base, which is here in California, which is a large piece of property. I can't do that in Pennsylvania. I can do that over here in the West. And so the West becomes a place where these bases pop up. Well, if you're going to build these bases, then you need to get electricity to them. You have to get plumbing to them. You have to do all this sort of infrastructure stuff. And once the roads and all that is built to do that, well, you might as well have a town right next door. So you need need for surrounding infrastructure and towns. So towns start to spring up with restaurants and places for the families. And then cities start to kind of grow around those things. And what's going to happen then is, let's say I'm going to build my factory. Maybe I'm not going to build it in China. Where I might build it is I might build it in Arizona because there's lots of space. I have all the infrastructure that I need now. It's kind of free. And I can say I'm building my factory in Arizona. The land is cheap. It's really expensive in Pennsylvania. It's cheap over here in Arizona. And that's true for the population as well. I need workers. Well, you can come down here, you can sell your little apartment in Pennsylvania, and you can buy your own house in Arizona because it's super cheap down here. So come on down. So investment ends up moving to the Southwest and jobs follow. And that we see that sort of trend happening. Now, this is a very US specific thing, but you will see this in every country. Every country is going to have this same story about how sort of economic areas shift and move, and so do the people inside of the state. All right. I want you to look at Detroit here, a little video on Detroit, and this thing they call urban blight. And then we want to talk about sort of where this leaves us.